It started as one of those talk show moments no one plans for, the kind that slips from fun banter to a global headline in 30 seconds. The studio lights burned hot that night. Vin Diesel sat under them like a man made for the stage, sleeveless shirt, a thick silver chain around his neck, the crowd eating out of his hand. He'd been promoting another sequel, telling stories about car chases, explosions, all the usual swagger. The host, grinning, leaned forward and asked the kind of question producers love. "You ever meet Chuck Norris?" Vin laughed before he answered. That kind of slow, rolling laugh people use when they know they're about to say something that'll trend. "Chuck Norris," he said, looking straight into the camera. "He was tough in the 80s. But come on, that guy's basically a meme now. I do my own stunts, he just kicks air on screen." The audience burst into laughter, sharp and nervous. The host tried to steer it back. "Well, he is a legend, Vin." But Vin wasn't done. He leaned forward, voice dropping to a calm, deliberate tone. "I respect him, but if he ever tried to test me, I'd fold him before the first bell." It hit the room like a slap. A few gasps. Then the laughter started again, louder this time, the kind that feeds on discomfort. The band played him out with fake drum hits, like a joke punchline. By morning, every outlet had clipped that line. The day Vin disrespected a legend. TikTok loops, YouTube mashups, even fake posters. Diesel versus Norris. Dawn of regret. To most people, it was entertainment, something to scroll past between headlines. But not to everyone. Thousands of miles away, on a quiet Texas ranch, the air was different. The wind pushed through cedar trees, carrying the smell of dust and hay. Inside a small wooden house, an old television flickered. Chuck Norris sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, a cup of black coffee cooling in front of him. His son had just shown him the clip. For a long moment, there was only the faint hum of the refrigerator. Chuck didn't speak. The light from the TV danced across his face. That unmistakable jaw, those eyes that used to freeze men on screen before they froze in real life. He watched the clip again, then again, each time a little slower. The son finally said, "Dad, don't take it seriously. It's just promo." Chuck raised a hand, eyes still on the screen. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady. "Let's see if he still laughs when the cameras aren't rolling." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. He clicked the remote, and the room went dark except for the thin orange glow from the stove pilot. For a man who'd spent decades being turned into a punchline, Chuck Norris doesn't do push-ups. The earth moves down. This was different. He didn't mind the jokes. He never had. But disrespect? That was another thing. Outside, the sky over the hills was turning purple. Coyotes called somewhere beyond the tree line. Chuck walked out to the porch, the boards creaking under his weight. He stood there in the wind, eyes narrowing at the horizon like he was measuring distance, not in miles, but in resolve. His breathing was calm. Too calm. That kind of quiet where you can almost hear thought becoming decision. The world had long forgotten that Chuck Norris wasn't just a face from the screen. He'd fought before cameras ever found him. Tournaments, bare floors, men who hit to break. He'd built his fame on precision, not posing. Every muscle had once been a memory of pain and discipline. He didn't need to prove anything. Not to the audience, not to Hollywood. But pride has a pulse, and sometimes, after years of stillness, it starts beating again, slow, heavy, impossible to ignore. That night, he didn't call his manager or make a statement. He didn't tweet. He just sat at his small wooden table, looking at an old black and white photo on the wall, him in a karate gi, a trophy in hand, eyes fierce and young. Then he took out a notebook, the kind with a leather cover, corners worn from years of training notes. He flipped it open, drew a line across the page, and wrote a date. Nothing else. The pen hung in the air for a moment, then tapped once against the page, a tiny sound, but sharp enough to cut the silence. From somewhere far away, a phone buzzed. Maybe a producer, maybe a journalist. He ignored it. By the next morning, the clip had gone viral enough that even the UFC's official account had posted it with a fire emoji. Hashtags piled up. Hashtag Diesel versus Norris. Hashtag Old Lion Awakens. Reporters waited for a response. None came. But inside that ranch house, something had shifted. The air felt charged, like the pause before thunder. Chuck wasn't angry. Anger was for men who lost control. This was colder, a kind of curiosity sharpened into purpose. He poured himself another cup of coffee, opened the door, and stepped into the morning sun. Somewhere deep inside, he smiled, just barely. And for the first time in a long time, the legend wasn't a joke anymore. The silence that followed was louder than applause. And somewhere, without knowing it, Vin Diesel had already started a fight that wouldn't stay on TV. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. The video didn't just fade away, it exploded. Every network, every feed, every sports page wanted a piece of it. Within 48 hours, it wasn't about Vin Diesel's new movie anymore. It was about the question no one had seriously asked in decades. Could Chuck Norris still fight? The internet answered before he did. Meme wars turned into debates. Old clips of Chuck in tournaments resurfaced. Grainy footage of spinning back kicks landing with surgical precision. Commentators argued over stats, reach, age. Vin's fans laughed it off, calling him fearless for even bringing up the legend's name. Others called it arrogance wearing a gym tank top. ESPN caught the wave first. Then Dana White smelled blood. Within a week, a proposal hit both camps. A charity exhibition fight. Diesel versus Norris. One night only. No belts. No judges. Just a show. For most, it sounded like a publicity stunt. For the networks, it was a gold mine. For Chuck, it was a quiet opportunity wrapped in noise. When the offer reached his ranch, he read it once, folded the paper in half, and left it on the table. The window was open, wind stirring the curtains. His son waited for a reaction, searching his face. Chuck didn't give one. He simply said, "Tell them I'll think about it." But he didn't need to think. He already knew. Across the country, in a Los Angeles gym thick with bass and sweat, Vin Diesel was rehearsing his confidence. The place looked like a cathedral for ego. Mirrors, flashing phones, trainers shouting over rap beats. He moved heavy weights, barked orders, played the part of a warrior in control. Cameras followed every set, every punch. When a journalist asked him if the fight was confirmed, he grinned mid-repetition. "I'm not here to hurt the guy. But let's be real, legends fade. It's time the new blood takes over." The crowd around him laughed. Someone shouted, "Fold him before the bell, Vin." He smiled wider, towel over his shoulder, charisma spilling out like cologne. But there was a moment, brief, too quick for cameras, when his eyes darted away, just for a second. Maybe doubt, maybe instinct. The part of every fighter that knows when he's poking something older, meaner, more dangerous than expected. Back in Texas, the sun sank over the plains, turning everything copper. Chuck stood barefoot on the dojo floor behind his house, the air thick with summer heat. The room was almost empty, wooden walls, old mats, a single heavy bag swaying like a clock's pendulum. He didn't blast music. No shouts, no hype. Only the whisper of fabric as he moved. His strikes were slow, deliberate, like a man sharpening a blade. Every hit echoed off the wood. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried weight, a rhythm built from years of precision. A younger student entered quietly, stopping at the door. "Sir, are you angry?" Chuck didn't look up. He hit the bag once more, stepped back, breathing steady. "Anger makes you sloppy," he said. "I'll stay sharp." Outside, crickets started their night chorus. He wiped sweat from his brow, eyes narrowing not from exhaustion, but focus. News anchors were already framing it as the battle of generations. One gray and silent, one loud and shining. The nation picked sides. Hashtags multiplied like wildfire. Hashtag Diesel dominates. Hashtag never bet against Norris. You couldn't open your phone without seeing someone choosing a corner. Vin kept feeding the machine. New videos, interviews, gym clips. He owned the spotlight. He told late-night hosts, "Hey, I grew up watching him. I respect the guy, but you can't stop time, man." And in every clip, he laughed after saying it. Always laughing. Meanwhile, Chuck stayed invisible. No posts. No statements. Just training. He woke at dawn, ran the dirt roads behind his ranch, hit the bag until his knuckles split. He wasn't chasing revenge. He was chasing control. That feeling of exact balance between calm and danger that only a fighter really understands. He studied Vin's movements from film sets, the way he threw his weight, how his shoulders rotated. Too much power, not enough grounding. Flash over structure. He'd seen that before. Men who looked like mountains and fell like sand. A local reporter drove out one afternoon, hoping for a quote. Chuck was in the yard fixing a fence. When asked about the fight, he didn't stop working. Is it true you're fighting Vin Diesel? He nodded once. Do you think you can win? Chuck lifted a plank, set it in place, and said quietly, I'm not fighting to win. I'm fighting to remind. The reporter tried to laugh it off, but something in the old man's eyes stopped him cold. By that night, the deal was official. Press releases went out. The tickets, gone in a day. The arena sold out before the posters even printed. The tagline read, One night, two eras, no scripts. Social media turned it into a circus, but beneath the noise, people felt something else. Nostalgia, curiosity, fear, maybe, the uneasy thrill of watching Youth Challenge time itself. Vin doubled his training schedule, hired ex-fighters, nutritionists, PR strategists. The gym became his stage, his mirror, his audience. Every movement rehearsed, every soundbite polished. Meanwhile, on the Texas plains, the world stayed silent. Just the hum of cicadas and the thud of bare feet on old mats. Chuck trained alone, methodical, almost reverent. He'd pause sometimes, standing perfectly still, eyes closed, like he was listening to something far away, not the wind, but memory. In Los Angeles, Diesel's entourage grew louder. In Texas, Norris's world grew quieter. Two men moving toward the same point from opposite directions. And when Chuck finally spoke again, it wasn't to a reporter, or to his son, or to the cameras. It was to the empty room, voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the dust. Let's dance, Hollywood. Somewhere across the country, Vin Diesel laughed at a meme of himself folding an elderly stunt dummy. He didn't know that the man he mocked had already started counting the days, not out of anger, but out of discipline. And in that stillness, something dangerous began to wake. The night didn't feel like entertainment anymore. It felt like a test. The arena in Los Angeles glowed under white-hot lights. Every seat was taken, every breath synchronized with the bass from the speakers. Reporters leaned over railings, phones held high. On the jumbotrons, clips played. Chuck's old tournament knockouts spliced beside Vin Diesel's movie punches. The crowd laughed, but the laughter had an edge. Then the announcer's voice hit. Ladies and gentlemen, the fight you never thought you'd see. Vin came first. The room pulsed to heavy rap. He entered in black shorts, bouncing, grinning, clapping hands with fans. Every move exaggerated for the cameras. He flexed once, shadowboxed toward the lens, and mouthed, This is my era. The audience screamed. He looked alive, electric, confident. Then the music stopped. A single spotlight turned white. Chuck Norris appeared from the tunnel, barefoot, calm, wrapped in a plain white GI. No song, no show, just the sound of his steps against the floor. Some people laughed, until they realized he wasn't acting. He reached the ring, bowed slightly to the ref, and waited. The stillness around him was unnerving. Even the commentators spoke quieter. When the bell rang, Vin exploded forward. Quick punches, short kicks, all muscle and noise. His speed looked impressive, wild energy filling the ring. The crowd loved it. He shouted with each swing, chest heaving, grinning between strikes. Chuck didn't answer. He didn't even blink. His body moved like smoke. Small shifts, perfect balance. Vin's gloves sliced through air. He missed by inches, again and again. 10 seconds. That's all it took for the energy to change. Vin's breathing grew louder. His rhythm slipped. His punches got heavier, slower. Chuck watched him, eyes focused, empty of emotion. The crowd began to sense something was off. Vin threw a hard right. Chuck stepped aside, barely. Then, almost lazily, he turned his wrist and delivered one short counterpunch. A dull thump. Nothing cinematic. Just clean. Vin froze. His head jerked. Then his legs folded. He hit the mat like a puppet whose strings had been cut. No flailing, no sound, just sudden stillness. The arena went dead quiet. For a few long seconds, nobody moved. The referee hesitated, unsure if it was part of the act. Then panic. Trainers rushed in. Cameras zoomed close, searching for a breath, a blink. Chuck stood over him, calm as stone. He crouched, placed a hand on Vin's shoulder, and whispered, barely audible even to the mic nearby. That's biology too. When Vin's eyes opened, he looked lost, blinking up at lights, trying to understand what happened. The ref waved it off. 14 seconds. The fight was over. Half the crowd cheered, half booed. No one believed what they'd just seen. Chuck didn't raise his hands. He bowed once to the ref, then turned and walked toward the tunnel. The cameras followed, desperate for a reaction. He didn't give them one. A reporter called out, "Mr. Norris, was that real?" Chuck didn't stop walking. "Does it look fake to you?" By the time he reached the locker hallway, the noise had turned into chaos. Commentators argued live on air, producers shouted into earpieces, fans screamed from the stands. The night had spun out of everyone's control. On the big screen, they replayed the punch in slow motion. Over and over. You could see the timing, one perfect connection between temple and jaw, as if physics itself had taken sides. The clip hit the internet within minutes. The silent strike. It looped everywhere, slowed down, analyzed, mythologized. For once, the memes were reverent. Comments flooded in. "Legends don't age. That's not a punch, that's precision." Diesel found out the hard way. Vin's camp called it an unfortunate misstep. They said he slipped. But the footage told a different story. A man with too much motion meeting another who had mastered stillness. The headlines wrote themselves. Vin Diesel tested the wrong legend. ESPN replayed it all night. UFC commentators broke down the mechanics frame by frame, trying to explain how a 70-something man could move that fast. No one had a satisfying answer. And Chuck? He disappeared. No press, no interviews, no victory laps. Just gone. Back to the ranch, to silence. But silence has weight. In that quiet, people started asking questions no one had asked in years. How long had he been training? Could he still fight for real? What else was he capable of? Inside the arena, Vin's team helped him sit up. He was dizzy, blinking, trying to remember his own words from weeks ago. That's biology. The echo must have hurt more than the punch. The cameras caught him muttering something. Voice cracked. Tell him I wasn't ready." But the truth was simpler. No one's ever ready for a man who's spent his life turning silence into a weapon. That night, millions laughed less and watched more closely. And somewhere in the Texas dark, Chuck poured himself a cup of coffee, eyes steady, heartbeat slow. He hadn't planned on proving anything. But the world had demanded an answer, and he'd given it. Now, it was the world's turn to respond. The internet didn't sleep that night. 14 seconds of footage became a global obsession before dawn. Every angle, every frame, dissected, slowed, captioned, looped. On TikTok, they called it the fast and the fallen. On YouTube, when a meme fights back. The clip ran on endless repeat. Vin's confident grin, the blur of his punch, the stillness, then the fall. A legend revived. A superstar humiliated. Laughter spread faster than the punch itself. Comment sections filled with the kind of cruelty that only strangers can afford. Guess he ran out of torque. Biology, baby. Chuck Norris doesn't age, he just waits. By morning, even mainstream outlets joined in. Late-night hosts replayed the knockout like it was slapstick. A sports anchor joked, 72 beats 39. That's not a fight, that's a math lesson. The crowd roared. Meanwhile, in the back seat of a silent SUV, Vin Diesel sat in the dark, the glow of passing streetlights cutting stripes across his bruised face. His lip was split, one eye already swelling shut. His hands trembled in his lap, not from pain, but from something colder, disbelief. Across from him, his agent scrolled furiously, reading headlines out loud as if to control them. "Okay, listen, we can spin this. You go on Fallon, crack a joke, something self-aware. People will love it. They'll say you're humble. We turn it into a meme you control." Vin didn't look up. His voice came out low and cracked. "You think this is funny?" The agent blinked, nervous. "Vin, He embarrassed me." The words cut the air in half. The agent shut his phone. The only sound left was the engine, the steady hum of Los Angeles at 2 a.m. They drove the rest of the way in silence. Hours later, in Texas, morning light crept through the wooden blinds of Chuck Norris's small dojo. He swept the mat himself, the scent of dust and cedar thick in the air. When the young students arrived, they were quieter than usual, respectful, cautious. Every one of them had seen the clip. Every one of them looked at their teacher a little differently. Chuck lined them up, his voice calm as ever. "Balance," he said. "Not just in your stance. In life." A boy hesitated, then blurted out, "Sir, did you really?" Chuck raised a hand, not angry, just still. Respect isn't earned by shouting, he said. It's earned by standing up after you fall. He didn't mention the fight again. Not to anyone. Not to the press who called. Not to the sponsors who came knocking. When a journalist finally caught him by the gate and asked for a quote, he only said, "I hope he's all right." Then he walked back toward the barn, dogs trailing behind him, the dust swallowing his steps. Back in Los Angeles, Vin watched his career replay itself in reverse. Networks ran highlight reels of his biggest scenes, each one ending with the image of him on the mat, the before and after of a man's ego. The laughter online grew meaner. His team urged him to respond, to reclaim control. He refused. At home, mirrors were covered with towels. The phone rang unanswered. He'd spent decades performing strength, muscles, cars, explosions, but now strength felt like something he couldn't fake. The silence pressed on him harder than the punch ever did. His friends tried to lighten it. "Man, it's just a show fight. You did it for charity." He stared at them, eyes blank. It wasn't a show for him. Days passed. The headlines shifted to politics, scandals, new trailers. But the clip kept living, replayed, remixed, immortalized. Every scroll through social media was another reminder. The moment a legend learned humility. Then, one morning, he left the city. No announcement. No entourage. His team said he was taking time to reset. But no one knew where he'd gone. Weeks followed. No photos. No interviews. No sightings. Fans speculated. Was he in Thailand, training in a monastery? In some underground gym, planning revenge? Rumors bred like weeds. Vin Diesel plotting a comeback. Secret rematch in the works. Diesel's dark silence. Behind the noise, only one thing was true. He'd vanished. The man who once lived on camera had stepped into the shadows. And for the first time in years, the world seemed louder without him. Somewhere far away, maybe on a quiet ranch road or a cold gym floor, he was alone with the sound that had haunted him since that night. The soft thump of that one perfect punch. He couldn't laugh it off. Couldn't post through it. Couldn't call it acting. He had been reminded, brutally, undeniably, that no script survives contact with reality. And in that silence, a question began to take shape. Not about revenge. Not about fame. About something smaller, sharper. Who was he without the noise? No one could answer it for him. So he decided to find out himself. And that meant finding the man who had forced him to ask it in the first place. The house felt different when no one else was in it. Too big. Too polished. Every echo came back sharp, reminding him what silence actually sounded like. For weeks, Vin Diesel had vanished from everything that made him visible. No gym cameras, no PR posts, no scripted smiles. Just a man alone with his reflection and the memory of 14 seconds that refused to fade. The internet had moved on. At least, that's what his agent kept saying in the voicemails Vin never answered. But he knew better. The clip still lived, buried under new headlines, waiting for another spark to drag it back into the light. He spent his mornings in the garage. No music. No film crew. The heavy bag hung crooked from a cracked beam, its surface worn raw. Every strike echoed through the walls, dull and uneven. He wasn't training. He was punishing something invisible. Sweat ran down his face, stinging the bruise that still hadn't faded on his jaw. He didn't count punches. He just hit until his arms burned. And with every blow, he whispered the same word, why? When exhaustion finally dropped him to his knees, he stayed there, gasping, hands pressed against cold concrete. His breath came out ragged, half anger, half shame. For the first time in years, the body that had built his fame felt foreign, heavy, slow, useless. He tried to remember how it felt to be unstoppable. He couldn't. One night, somewhere between the ache and the silence, he scrolled through his phone and found a number he hadn't saved, an old contact from the charity organizers. A number tied to a man who probably never checked his messages. He stared at it for a long time. Then, before he could change his mind, he hit call. It rang twice. Then a voice, calm, gravelly, unmistakable. Hello. Vin swallowed. His throat was dry. You made me look weak. There was a pause, not hesitation, but stillness. When Chuck Norris finally spoke, his tone didn't rise, didn't mock. It was simply true. No, he said. You made you look weak. Vin blinked, the words landing like another hit. You think that was fair? I was. You were unprepared, Chuck said. And that's not my fault. The line went quiet again. Then a soft click. He'd hung up. Vin stared at the phone. Then the rage came. Hot, directionless. He grabbed the bag again and started hitting. Harder. Faster. The chain squealed overhead. His knuckles split. He didn't stop. Blood smeared across the leather. The pain blurred into rhythm. When he finally missed a punch, the momentum twisted his wrist wrong. He heard the pop before he felt it. A short cry escaped his throat, not of pain, but disbelief. He cradled his hand, breathing fast, eyes wet with something he didn't want to name. He sat there for a long time, sweat pooling under him, wrist throbbing, pride bleeding out. In that moment, he realized he wasn't angry at Chuck anymore. Not really. The old man hadn't taken anything from him. He'd only revealed what was already hollow. The following days blurred. Friends dropped by, cautiously, like visitors to a hospital room. One of them, a stunt coordinator he'd known for 20 years, tried to lighten the mood. Come on, Vin. It was a show fight. A meme. Forget it. Vin stared at the cracked bag, hand wrapped in tape. It wasn't a show for him. The friend sighed. So what? He's old school. Let it go. But Vin shook his head. His voice was quiet, almost detached. No, it was a message, and I still don't understand it. That night, he didn't train. He didn't watch the clip. He just sat on the porch, listening to the city hum in the distance. For once, he didn't feel famous. Just small. He thought about that moment before the knockout, that silence in the ring, the breath Chuck took before moving. It hadn't been aggression. It was something else. A kind of patience that made Vin's chaos look childish. He realized he'd spent his whole life trying to prove strength. Louder, faster, bigger, without ever learning what it actually meant. The next morning, he packed a bag. No cameras. No assistants. Just a duffel and the same bruised hand he'd been hiding for weeks. His team panicked when they found out he'd left. Calls flooded in. Vin, where are you going? He gave the same answer every time. Somewhere quiet. He didn't say it out loud, but he already knew where that road led. To a ranch in Texas. To a man who had broken him with one perfectly timed punch and one sentence that still echoed. He wasn't looking for revenge anymore. He was looking for something else, something harder to win. Answers. And maybe, if he was lucky, redemption. He turned off his phone halfway across New Mexico and let the signal die. Outside the car window, the horizon stretched forever, wide, empty, honest. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel lost. Just unfinished. He tightened his grip on the wheel and whispered to the open road, like a confession no one else would hear. This time I'll listen. The dirt road stretched for miles, cutting through the Texas heat like an old scar. Dust curled behind the rental truck, sunlight turning the windshield into glass fire. Vin's hands gripped the wheel, knuckles pale. Every mile felt heavier than the last, as if the air itself resisted his arrival. When he finally reached the gate, the world went still. A weathered sign leaned against a post, Norris Ranch. Beyond it, the land rolled wide and honest, cedar trees, rusted fencing, a distant shed humming with cicadas. A pair of cattle dogs trotted out from the shade, eyeing the stranger but not barking. They didn't need to. Their silence said enough. He stepped out. Gravel shifted under his boots. The air smelled of hay, oil, and sunburnt wood. Somewhere nearby, a rhythmic sound. Not metal, not machinery, but the soft repetition of fists meeting pads. He followed it. Behind the house stood a small dojo, doors open to the light. Inside, children lined up barefoot on worn mats. Chuck Norris moved among them. Calm, steady, precise. He corrected a stance here, adjusted a wrist there. No theatrics, just quiet authority. When a boy missed a block and stumbled, Chuck smiled. Not the legend's grin, but something small and human. Try again, he said softly. The boy nodded and did. Then stood at the threshold, half in sunlight, half in shadow. The sight disarmed him. The old man wasn't the myth the internet built. Not the meme, not the killer, just a teacher. For a moment, Vin almost turned back to the truck. But Chuck saw him. He didn't react, didn't pause the lesson. He just looked, eyes unreadable, and finished what he was doing. Only when the final bow came did he turn fully toward the doorway. The students froze, realizing who was standing there. A murmur rippled through them. Whispers, quick and electric. Chuck clapped his hands once. Respect, he said. The kids bowed, gathered their things, and filed out, quiet as mist. When the last child left, The two men were alone. Up close, Chuck looked smaller than Vin remembered, but harder, compact, carved by time. His presence filled the room anyway. Vin couldn't find his voice at first. Then, finally, "You made me a joke." Chuck didn't flinch. "No," he said evenly. "I reminded you that power without purpose is just noise." The words landed clean, unforced. Vin swallowed. "Then what's the point of power?" Chuck's eyes drifted toward the open door, where sunlight spilled across the floor like water. "To control what scares you," he said, "not to destroy it." The silence that followed was heavy but alive. Vin looked down, fingers twitching against his jeans. "You could have said that before knocking me out." Chuck almost smiled. "You wouldn't have listened." The fan above them clicked in lazy rhythm. The smell of sweat and pine filled the air. Vin exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders finally admitting itself. "I called you," he said quietly. "You hung up." "I said what needed saying." Vin nodded once. "So what now? You teach me philosophy?" Chuck walked to an old locker, its paint chipped and green with age. He opened it, pulled out 2 pairs of gloves, worn, soft, creased from years of use. He tossed one set toward Vin. "Round 2, he said. "No cameras. Just truth." Vin caught them. The leather felt real, too real. Not the sleek props from movie sets, but tools shaped by repetition. He hesitated, then slipped them on. "Any rules?" he asked. Chuck tied his own gloves, looked up, and said, "Yeah, don't try to win." The floor creaked as they stepped onto the mat. The air thickened. Outside, the wind stirred the chime into a single, wavering note. Vin lifted his guard. The habit came easy, but his chest felt different, calmer. His first jab cut through air. Chuck didn't move much, just leaned aside, effortless. No counter, just watching. Vin tried again, tighter, cleaner. Another miss, but closer. He could feel something shifting inside him. The difference between effort and control. "Breathe," Chuck said. Not a command, a reminder. They circled each other, quiet except for the scuff of bare feet. Every movement felt stripped of ego, of showmanship. Vin's punches lost their anger. His breathing evened out. Sweat ran down his neck, salt stinging his lip. He spoke between breaths. "I'm not angry anymore." Chuck nodded. "Good. Now you can learn." The next exchange came slower. A jab, a pivot, a feint. Chuck didn't strike back. He guided, redirected, shaped. Each touch was instruction, not domination. Vin began to see patterns. How balance came from stillness. How precision lived in restraint. The lesson wasn't physical. It was rhythm. Listening. Minutes blurred. Sunlight shifted across the walls, turning dust into gold. The world outside, fame, noise, humiliation, felt like a place that no longer existed. Finally, Chuck stepped in close, glove resting lightly on Vin's shoulder. "Now," he said, voice quiet enough to hear the heartbeat between words. "You're almost fighting right." Vin looked at him, not as a rival anymore, but as something harder to name. "Almost." Chuck grinned, faint but real. "Come back tomorrow. We'll see if you can finish the sentence." Outside, the wind died. Inside, 2 men stood in silence, teacher and student, strength and humility. And for the first time, Vin felt the noise inside him finally go still. Morning came cool and silver. Mist hung over the Texas fields, softening everything it touched. The dogs padded through the grass, tails cutting faint trails in the fog. The air smelled of cedar and soil, the kind of morning that felt like it belonged to no one. Vin arrived just after sunrise. The truck door shut softly behind him. No cameras. No team. Just a man with a bruised spirit and clean gloves hanging from his shoulder. He walked toward the dojo, drawn by the rhythm of a broom sweeping dust, steady, patient. Chuck was already there, sleeves rolled, clearing the mats. He looked up once, nodded. No words. He set the broom aside. "Gloves," he said simply. Vin slid them on, the old leather cool against his palms. He stepped onto the mat, feeling the wood flex under his weight. This time, there was no tension, no nervous energy. Just readiness. They faced each other in silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the ceiling fan. The first exchange was small, a jab, a sidestep, a glance. Chuck's hands moved like water, redirecting, never forcing. Vin followed, slower now, deliberate. Every motion had weight. Every pause, a reason. He breathed through his chest at first, then lower, deeper, as Chuck had taught. The noise in his head, the crowd, the laughter, the humiliation, faded. What replaced it wasn't pride or vengeance. It was focus. Chuck spoke between movements, his voice low but sharp. Don't fight the man. Fight your habit. Vin's next punch landed near perfect. Not to hurt, but to connect. Chuck blocked, nodded slightly. Better. They circled again. The air thickened with heat, but neither man rushed. Sweat dripped, bare feet slid, wood creaked. This wasn't a fight. It was a conversation. Every strike, an unfinished sentence. Every parry, an answer. Minutes stretched into something that didn't feel like time. Vin felt his body change, smaller, calmer, efficient. The wild, cinematic swings were gone. What replaced them was something he hadn't known he was missing: control. He moved again, tighter, closer. Chuck met him, eyes locked, calm as still water. Vin threw a hook to the ribs, pulled it just short, controlled. Chuck's mouth curved slightly. Now you're fighting right, he said. Vin froze, chest heaving, heart steadying itself. For the first time since the fall, he smiled. Not the actor's grin, but the quiet kind that belongs to real people. Guess the old man still had something to teach me. Chuck tilted his head, that faint spark of humor in his eyes. We all get old, he said. Not all of us get wise. They both laughed, low, honest, tired. Then silence again. Outside, the fog was burning off, the fields turning gold. Vin dropped to one knee, unlacing his gloves. I thought power was about dominance, he said. About proving something. Chuck wiped his forehead with a towel. Power's about control. But control isn't about others, it's about yourself. Vin looked down at his hands, bruised, taped, shaking just slightly. And if you lose it? Then you start again, Chuck said. That's what the floor's for. They stood there a moment longer. No need for more words. The lesson was finished. Or maybe just beginning. When Vin left the dojo, the dogs followed him to the truck, tails wagging like they knew something had been fixed inside him. He paused before getting in, looking back at the small wooden building and the man still standing in its doorway. No bow, no handshake, just a shared look that said everything worth saying. The drive back was quiet. He didn't turn on music, didn't check his phone. The hum of the tires on the road was enough. By the time he reached Los Angeles, he knew what he wanted to do. The next day, he sat alone in front of a single camera. No PR team, no set, no lighting tricks. Just a bare room and the truth. He looked straight ahead, voice steady. I want to test Chuck Norris, he said. Turns out, he tested me. That was it. No trailer, no marketing tie-in, no performance. Just the clip, 30 seconds long, uploaded quietly. The internet paused for once. Some mocked. Some rolled their eyes. But others understood. The same people who'd laughed at the fall replayed this one too. Not for schadenfreude, but respect. They called it the quiet comeback. No sequel. No rematch. Just a man who had learned what strength really was. And somewhere, back in Texas, Chuck watched the video on a small laptop in the kitchen. He smiled once, then closed it, content. The dogs barked outside, asking to be let in. The screen faded to black. And this time, the silence that followed didn't sting. It felt earned.